In the year 1258, the great city of Baghdad burned. The waters of the Tigris River turned crimson, carrying the blood of countless victims. Under the command of Hulagu Khan, grandson of the legendary Genghis Khan, the Mongols had stormed and conquered the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, once one of the brightest centers of culture, knowledge, and civilization on earth. Libraries that had safeguarded centuries of wisdom were set ablaze. The House of Wisdom, where scholars of every faith once gathered to debate philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy, was reduced to ashes. The last Abbasid caliph met a brutal end, wrapped in a carpet and trampled beneath horses, for the Mongols believed it was bad luck to spill royal blood directly onto the ground. The Islamic world was left in utter disbelief. Baghdad, the city that had been the beating heart of civilization for more than 5 centuries, lay silent, shattered, and lifeless. But this was far more than just another Mongol conquest. It was part of a relentless campaign of terror that had begun decades earlier on the vast steppes of Central Asia. The Mongols were not merely conquerors. They were a storm that swept across continents, an unstoppable military force whose efficiency and brutality defied comprehension. They had crushed ancient empires, erased entire cities from the map, and built an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Eastern Europe. Those who dared to resist faced annihilation. Populations were wiped out, men, women, and children, left as grim warnings to all who might think to defy Mongol power. The very name Mongol became synonymous with unavoidable destruction. And now, after the fall of Baghdad, their eyes turned westward. Syria stood next in line. Aleppo fell swiftly, followed by Damascus. Cities that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires now bowed before the horsemen of the steppes. Hulagu Khan then sent his envoys to Egypt with a chilling message, a demand for immediate submission or certain doom. His words left no room for diplomacy. It was simple: total obedience or total destruction. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to subscribe and share in the comments the exact time you're watching this video. Now let's continue the story. At this time, Egypt was ruled by the Mamluks, a unique and extraordinary military class unlike any other in history. The word Mamluk itself meant slave, but these were no ordinary slaves. They were elite warriors, hand-picked and purchased as young boys from regions like the Caucasus, Anatolia, and the Black Sea steppes. Taken to Egypt, they were converted to Islam and subjected to years of rigorous training, mastering the art of war, while also being educated in governance, religion, and statecraft. Once their training ended, they were granted freedom and became part of a tightly bound military brotherhood built on loyalty stronger than blood. Though technically free, they remained united by an unbreakable code of honor and service. In time, they rose to power and established their own ruling dynasty. At this critical moment in history, the Mamluks were led by Sultan Qutuz. He had recently ascended to the throne after a turbulent power struggle following the death of his predecessor. Qutuz himself carried a past of tragedy and irony. As a child, he had been captured during the Mongol invasions of Central Asia and sold into slavery. The very empire that had destroyed his homeland and murdered his family had indirectly forged his destiny. Through the Mamluk system, this enslaved boy had risen to become one of the fiercest warriors and most capable leaders of his generation. Now standing as the ruler of Egypt, few men in history understood the Mongol threat as deeply as Qutuz did. He harbored no illusions about their intentions. When Hulagu's ambassadors arrived in Cairo with their message of submission, the Mamluk court was thrown into chaos. Many advisors pleaded for peace. They argued that resistance was suicide. After all, what chance did Egypt have when so many others had fallen? The Khwarezmian Empire, once a formidable Central Asian power, had been obliterated. The Jin dynasty of China had fallen after years of bloody resistance. Kiev and the Russian principalities had been reduced to ashes. Poland and Hungary had been invaded and devastated, spared only because the Mongols had withdrawn following the death of their great Khan. Every empire, every army that had stood in their path had been crushed beneath Mongol hooves. Why then should Egypt be any different? But Qutuz made a decision that stunned the world. He ordered the execution of the Mongol ambassadors. In medieval diplomacy, killing envoys was considered one of the gravest acts imaginable, a declaration of total war, eliminating any chance of negotiation or mercy. The Mongols, in particular, were known to avenge such acts with terrifying ferocity. When the Shah of the Khwarezmian Empire had executed Mongol merchants and envoys decades earlier, Genghis Khan himself had led a campaign of vengeance that wiped that empire from existence. Qutuz knew this history well. He understood exactly what his actions meant. By killing the ambassadors, he was severing all ties, burning every bridge. There would be no surrender, no retreat, no compromise, only victory or death. His message was clear not only to the Mongols but to his own people. Egypt would fight no matter the cost, but Qutuz was no fool. He knew that courage alone would never be enough to stand against the Mongols. History was filled with the names of brave men who had perished before the unstoppable armies of the steppes. The Mongols did not triumph merely because of their ferocity. They triumphed because they were astonishingly well organized, disciplined beyond measure, and unmatched in tactical brilliance. To defeat them, the Mamluks would require more than valor. They would need intelligence, cunning, and strategy. And above all, they would have to turn the Mongols' own methods against them. To understand the magnitude of what Qutuz and his men faced, one must understand why the Mongol army was unlike any other force in history. The Mongols had transformed warfare in ways unseen since the conquests of Alexander the Great. Their army was centered around mounted archers, a devastating combination that most enemies had no idea how to counter. Every Mongol warrior was, in essence, a master horse archer trained from childhood. Mongol children learned to ride before they could even walk properly. By the age of 4 or 5, they were already learning to draw the bow. By 15, they were veterans in horsemanship and archery. The Mongol composite bow was a marvel of craftsmanship, built from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, glued together and left to cure for years. It could launch arrows more than 200 meters with deadly force. But its true power lay in how it was used. Mongol warriors could shoot with frightening accuracy while galloping at full speed, even twisting in their saddles to fire backward, a technique known as Parthian shooting. Imagine the terror of facing them. An enemy army advances confident in its numbers. Then over the horizon a dark cloud of horsemen appears. The enemy braces for close combat. But before the lines can even meet, the Mongols unleash a rain of arrows, then swiftly retreat. When their pursuers charge after them, the Mongols turn in their saddles and fire backward, cutting them down as they flee. This deadly dance of attack and withdrawal could continue for hours until the enemy's formation shattered in chaos and exhaustion. Yet the Mongols' brilliance went far beyond individual skill. They had developed a system of battlefield communication that was centuries ahead of its time. Through the use of flags, drums, and even whistling arrows, their commanders could orchestrate the movements of thousands of horsemen with perfect precision. Units could split, regroup, encircle, and strike from multiple directions in flawless coordination. Whereas European and Middle Eastern armies often fought as disorganized masses of men seeking personal glory, the Mongols moved like a living machine, precise, efficient, and merciless. Their intelligence network was equally formidable. Spies and scouts were dispatched long before an invasion began. Mongol merchants traveled across the lands they intended to conquer, gathering information about terrain, fortifications, and the size of enemy forces. By the time their armies arrived, the Mongols often knew more about their opponents' territories than the defenders themselves. They exploited weaknesses, fueled political divisions, and unleashed terror as a weapon. Their reputation alone could destroy morale. Cities surrendered in fear after hearing tales of what happened to those who resisted. In Baghdad, the Mongols had piled skulls into towering pyramids as a warning to the world. The Mongols were also masters of adaptation. When they conquered China, they captured engineers and learned the art of siege warfare. Soon, these once nomadic warriors were deploying catapults, siege towers, and even crude forms of gunpowder weapons. They forced Chinese, Persian, and Arab engineers to serve in their ranks, blending centuries of scientific and military knowledge into their arsenal. What made them truly terrifying was their lack of pride. If an enemy's method worked, they adopted it instantly. They were students of every war they fought. Even their logistics were revolutionary. Each Mongol soldier traveled with 4 or 5 spare horses, allowing them to cover astonishing distances without tiring their mounts. While conventional armies could march 15 to 20 kilometers a day, the Mongols could travel 2 or 3 times that distance with ease. They survived on fermented milk, dried meat, and even the blood of their horses when food ran short. A diet that made them nearly self-sufficient. They needed no supply lines, no slow-moving caravans. They appeared where no one expected and vanished before reinforcements could respond. It was mobility perfected, war in its most fluid and terrifying form. So when Qutuz and the Mamluks looked north toward Mongol-occupied Syria, they knew they were not merely facing an army. They were facing a war machine refined through generations of conquest. Yet, unlike so many before them, the Mamluks held advantages that no other Mongol enemy had possessed. First, they too were masters of mounted warfare. Every Mamluk was a professional cavalryman, trained from youth in the art of horsemanship, archery, and close combat. They practiced relentlessly, charging with lances, fighting with curved swords, firing arrows from horseback at full gallop. In terms of individual skill, the Mamluks were the closest match the Mongols had ever faced. Second, they had something else the Mongols' past enemies lacked: recent, hard-earned battle experience. For decades, the Mamluks had fought the Crusaders, the most feared knights of Europe. They had clashed with heavily armored cavalry, stormed stone fortresses, and waged brutal campaigns across the deserts of the Levant. They knew how to fight disciplined armies and adapt to new tactics under pressure. The crucible of the Crusades had forged them into hardened, resourceful soldiers. And third, and perhaps most important of all, the Mamluks were fighting for their own homeland. They were not defending a distant emperor or abstract cause. They were defending Egypt, their people, their faith, and their future. For them, this was not merely a battle for survival. It was a holy duty and a reckoning long overdue. For the Mongols, this was just another campaign in their long, relentless march of conquest. For the Mamluks, it was a battle for existence itself. Defeat would not only mean the death of their warriors, but the annihilation of their families, their state, and everything they had built. This difference in purpose could not be overstated. The Mongols fought for duty, discipline, and the promise of plunder. The Mamluks fought for survival. Qutuz wasted no time. He began mobilizing every available warrior across Egypt. But then he made a bold and controversial decision on Ḥain, one that showed his ruthless pragmatism. He recalled from exile one of his greatest rivals, a brilliant Mamluk commander named Baybars. Baybars had been driven into exile after political intrigue, but was widely recognized as one of the most gifted generals of his age. He had led decisive victories against the Crusaders and was a master of battlefield tactics and strategy. Qutuz, setting aside all personal grievances, reinstated Baybars and gave him a senior command in the army that would face the Mongols. It was the act of a leader who understood that the unity of Egypt was more important than his own pride. Meanwhile, far to the north, Hulagu Khan faced an unexpected crisis. News arrived from Mongolia. His brother, the great Khan Munka, was dead. His death threw the Mongol Empire into a succession struggle. As one of the most powerful princes in the royal line, Hulagu had to return east to stake his claim. He left Syria with most of his troops, keeping only around 20,000 men under the command of his trusted general, Kitbuka. Kitbuka was a hardened veteran of countless Mongol campaigns and a skilled strategist in his own right. He was also a Nestorian Christian, which gave the coming conflict a peculiar twist. Many local Christian communities in Syria initially welcomed the Mongols, viewing them as potential liberators from Muslim rule. Even with a smaller army, Kitbuka's 20,000 Mongol horsemen remained a terrifying force. But it was a fraction of the massive army of over 100,000 that had conquered Baghdad. This change meant that the Mamluks would not be facing the full might of the Mongol Empire, only a powerful expeditionary force. The odds were still against them, but the gap had narrowed. Qutuz rallied an army of roughly 20,000 Mamluk warriors, joined by 10,000 Bedouin Arab auxiliaries who had sworn to fight alongside them. For the first time in years, the numbers between the Mongols and their enemy were almost equal. A rarity, since the Mongols had often crushed larger armies before. In the summer of 1260, the Mamluk army began its march from Egypt across the scorching Sinai desert. The journey was perilous. 30,000 men and tens of thousands of horses had to cross a barren wasteland where a single miscalculation could mean death. Wells had to be located and protected, supplies transported over endless sand, and routes carefully mapped. But the Mamluks were veterans of desert warfare, disciplined and accustomed to hardship. Step by step, they advanced in perfect order. When they reached Palestine, Qutuz made a decisive choice. Instead of pushing straight into Mongol-held Syria, he searched for a battleground that would favor his army's strengths. He chose the valley of Ain Jalut, the spring of Goliath, a place heavy with biblical symbolism, near what is now the city of Nazareth. The valley was narrow, flanked by rolling hills, and offered little space for wide maneuvers. This was deliberate. The Mongols thrived in open plains where they could surround their enemies. But in this confined terrain, their mobility and flanking tactics would be restricted. The valley's uneven ground and patches of vegetation also provided perfect cover for ambushes, something Qutuz planned to exploit. He devised a bold plan. Baybars would lead a smaller advance force to lure the Mongols into the valley, giving the illusion of retreat. It was a daring gamble. If the Mongols detected the trap, they could refuse to fight or crush Baybars' detachment before help could arrive. But Qutuz trusted Mongol arrogance to be their undoing. Kitbuka, upon hearing that a Mamluk army had entered Syria, immediately mobilized his troops to meet them. The Mongols had never known defeat in a pitched battle. They viewed the Mamluks as just another doomed enemy. On the morning of September 3rd, 1260, the two forces met near Ain Jalut, as planned. Baybars' vanguard clashed with the Mongols in fierce skirmishes, arrows flying, brief charges and retreats executed with precision. Then suddenly the Mamluks began to pull back. The Mongols, seeing what they thought was a panicked withdrawal, gave chase. It was a maneuver the Mongols themselves had perfected countless times. Feigned retreat to lure the enemy into a trap. Kitbuka was confident he was witnessing just that, a broken enemy fleeing before the unstoppable might of the Mongol cavalry. Perhaps he believed the fearsome reputation of his people had shattered Mamluk morale. Or perhaps, like so many before him, he simply underestimated those who stood before him. As Baybars' troops retreated deeper into the valley, the Mongols pursued eagerly, their formation stretching thin as they advanced. Then, at the perfect moment, Qutuz raised his sword and gave the signal. From behind the hills and the thickets surrounding the valley, thousands of hidden Mamluk horsemen surged forward. The Mongols were caught off guard, surrounded on three sides, their rear blocked by the Mamluk forces lying in wait. For the first time in decades, a Mongol army found itself trapped. But the Mongols were not a people who surrendered easily. Kitbuka reacted swiftly, rallying his men and attempting to break through the encirclement. Even cornered and outnumbered, the Mongols fought with ferocity, determined to defy the impossible once more. What unfolded next was one of the fiercest and bloodiest battles of the entire medieval age. For hours, the two greatest cavalry forces of their time collided in the valley with unrelenting fury. Arrows filled the sky so thickly that, as some chroniclers wrote, they darkened the sun and swarmed like locusts. The roar of hooves thundered across the plain. Mingled with the shrieks of men and horses, the clash of steel, and the hiss of arrows slicing through the air. A chaos so deafening it seemed the earth itself trembled. Even trapped and surrounded, the Mongols fought with the same ruthless precision and courage that had made them the terror of nations. They formed tight defensive circles, their cavalry maintaining formation with remarkable discipline despite the relentless assault. Kitbuka, ever defiant, led charge after charge, trying to pierce the Mamluk lines and carve a way out of the encirclement. For a moment, it seemed the tide might turn, that the Mongols might once again snatch victory from certain defeat. But the Mamluks held firm. They had trained their entire lives for battles exactly like this. Each Mamluk was not merely a soldier. He was a master horseman, a skilled archer, and a warrior forged through endless drills and trials. Arrow met arrow, sword met sword, and for the first time the Mongols met an enemy who could match them in skill and surpass them in resolve. And here lies the true secret weapon mentioned in this tale. It was not a new invention or hidden device. It was knowledge, the understanding of the Mongols themselves. The Mamluks had studied the Mongols meticulously. It was knowledge, the understanding of the Mongols themselves. The Mamluks had studied the Mongols meticulously. They had analyzed their tactics, rehearsed counter-strategies, and built a plan to strip away the advantages of Mongol speed, mobility, and deception. They turned geography into their ally and used the Mongols' own methods against them. The trap at Ain Jalut was built upon the famous Mongol tactic of feigned retreat. But this time, the hunters became the hunted. The Mamluks transformed Mongol confidence into overconfidence and their pride into a fatal flaw. Yet beyond strategy, the Mamluks possessed something the Mongols had rarely encountered, an unbreakable will to survive. There was no path of retreat, no thought of surrender. Qutuz had already executed the Mongol envoys, ensuring that mercy would not exist should they lose. Every Mamluk warrior knew that defeat meant annihilation, not only for themselves but for their families, their homes, and the entire Islamic world. They fought not just for victory but for existence itself. The memory of Baghdad's fall, of Damascus and Aleppo burning, haunted them and hardened their hearts. They knew exactly what awaited if they failed. As the hours dragged on, the terrain began to turn against the Mongols. The narrow valley that Qutuz had chosen confined their movements, robbing them of the wide open plains they needed for their sweeping maneuvers and lightning flanks. Their tactics, perfected over decades of conquest, were useless in this cramped killing ground. Meanwhile, the Mamluks fought with unwavering coordination. Their formations held, their reserves struck precisely when needed, and their morale burned bright beneath the desert sun. Qutuz's leadership shone most brilliantly at the moment of greatest peril. When a section of the Mamluk line wavered under a fierce Mongol charge, Qutuz tore off his helmet so that every man could see his face and cried out, "Wa Islama!"
"Oh, my Islam!
Then he spurred his horse forward and led a furious counterattack himself. The sight of their sultan charging into the fray ignited the spirits of his soldiers. This was not a distant ruler commanding from safety. This was a warrior king fighting shoulder to shoulder with his men. The Mamluks rallied with renewed fury, driving the Mongols back step by step. By late afternoon, the balance had irreversibly shifted. Mongol formations began to crumble under the relentless pressure. Kitbuka, proud and unyielding to the end, realized the battle was lost. When offered surrender, he refused with scorn, declaring he would rather die than yield. He fell in the fighting, sword in hand, surrounded by his men. With their commander dead, Mongol resistance collapsed. A few survivors fled northward, but most were slain or captured. As night fell over the valley of Ain Jalut, silence replaced the thunder of battle. For the first time in more than half a century, a Mongol army had been utterly destroyed in open combat. The myth of Mongol invincibility was shattered. The bodies of warriors who had once conquered from the coasts of China to the plains of Hungary now lay broken across a field in Palestine. Word of the miracle spread swiftly across the Islamic world. Cities that had surrendered to the Mongols rose in rebellion. Mongol garrisons were slaughtered, their survivors chased out of Syria. Within weeks, the tide had turned. The Mongols were forced to withdraw to Mesopotamia. Never again would they threaten Egypt or push deeper into the Arab world. From a historical perspective, the Battle of Ain Jalut stands as one of the defining moments in world history. The day the unstoppable force finally met its match. Had the Mamluks been defeated that day, history itself might have taken a very different course. The Mongols could have swept through Egypt, destroyed Mecca and Medina, were the holiest cities in Islam, and possibly continued westward into North Africa. The very heart of the Islamic world might have fallen beneath the hooves of Mongol cavalry. But instead, Ain Jalut became the line the Mongols could not cross. It marked the outer limit of their empire and proved that they were not invincible after all. It showed that an opponent who understood their tactics, who could match their discipline and courage, could stand against them and win. The battle secured the survival of the Mamluk Sultanate and elevated it to the status of the dominant power in the Middle East. For the next 2.5 centuries, until the Ottoman conquest in 1517, the Mamluks would rule Egypt and much of the Levant. They became the guardians of Islam's sacred cities and the leaders of the Sunni Muslim world. Ironically, the Mamluk system, born from military slavery, proved one of the most enduring and effective ruling structures in Islamic history. Yet the personal fates of the men who shaped Ain Jalut were marked by tragedy and betrayal. Qutuz, the man who had saved Egypt and perhaps the entire Islamic civilization, would not live to celebrate his triumph. Only weeks after the victory, as the army marched back toward Cairo, Qutuz was assassinated by Baybars and a group of conspirators. Historians still debate the motives behind the killing. Some say Baybars acted out of ambition and jealousy, eager for the throne. Others claim the murder was rooted in resentment, that Qutuz had promised to return certain lands to their original owners, angering Baybars and his allies who had been rewarded with them. Whatever the reason, Baybars seized the throne and became sultan. He would go on to rule as one of the most formidable leaders in Mamluk history. Under his reign, Egypt became the most powerful state in the region. He expelled the last crusaders from the Holy Land, strengthened trade and administration, and turned Cairo into the beating heart of the Islamic world. For the Mongols, however, Ain Jalut was nothing short of a catastrophe. It was not merely a defeat, it was a humiliation. An entire Mongol army had been annihilated in open battle by an enemy they had dismissed as inferior. The psychological shock rippled through the vast Mongol domains. For decades, their success had relied not only on military power, but on the myth of invincibility. That illusion was gone. Now other nations realized that the Mongols could be resisted, outmaneuvered, and even destroyed. While the Mongol Empire would endure in different forms for centuries, its boundless expansion had ended forever. When Hulagu Khan learned of the disaster, his rage was boundless. He vowed vengeance and planned several retaliatory invasions against the Mamluks. Yet internal conflicts among the Mongol Khanates and political struggles in the heart of the empire prevented him from carrying out a full-scale campaign. The Ilkhanate he established in Persia and Mesopotamia continued to clash with the Mamluks for decades, but the frontier fixed after Ain Jalut remained largely stable. The two powers alternated between warfare, uneasy truces, and even trade, but the Mongols never again threatened Egypt. The Mamluk victory carried immense spiritual and cultural weight. For the Islamic world, still reeling from the loss of Baghdad and the destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate, Ain Jalut was redemption. It was proof that God had not abandoned his people, that faith and courage could still overcome even the most terrifying enemy. The triumph was celebrated across cities and deserts alike. Poets, chroniclers, and storytellers immortalized the Mamluks in song and legend. Baybars, in particular, became a near-mythic figure. The warrior sultan who had helped crush the Mongols and later banish the Crusaders. Tales of his valor, often exaggerated or wholly invented, would echo for centuries in the Arab world. But the aftermath of Ain Jalut also brought tragedy for others. Many local Christians, especially Armenians and Syrians, had initially sided with the Mongols, hoping they would overthrow Muslim rule and restore Christian dominion in the Holy Land. The fact that Kitbuka, the Mongol general, was himself a Christian had fueled those hopes. When the Mongols fell, retribution came swiftly. The Mamluks struck hard at those seen as collaborators. Churches were destroyed, Christian quarters burned, and thousands were killed or driven into exile. The fragile coexistence between Muslims and Christians, already strained by 2 centuries of crusades, deteriorated even further. The dream of a Mongol-Christian alliance against Islam perished forever in the dust of Ain Jalut. For the remaining Crusader states along the Levantine coast, the battle's outcome was a hidden curse. Some Crusader leaders had quietly hoped the Mongols would crush Muslim power, leaving them dominant by default. Instead, the Mamluks emerged stronger than ever and turned their full might against the Crusaders. Baybars unleashed a relentless campaign to eliminate every last remnant of their presence. City after city, fortress after fortress fell. Antioch was captured in 1268. The mighty Crac de Chevalier, once thought impregnable, fell in 1271. Finally, in 1291, the great coastal stronghold of Acre was taken, marking the end of 2 centuries of Crusader rule in the Holy Land. The legacy of Ain Jalut extends far beyond religion or territory. It became a timeless study in military genius and human resolve. For generations, commanders analyzed how the Mamluks had achieved the impossible. The lesson was clear. Victory belongs not just to those with power, but to those who understand their enemy. The Mamluks succeeded because they studied the Mongols, learned their tactics, and developed precise countermeasures. They chose the battlefield, controlled the timing, and dictated the terms of engagement. They used deception, geography, and timing to turn the Mongols' greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. And when the moment came, they had the courage, discipline, and leadership to see their plan through. The battle also revealed the profound importance of personal leadership. Both Kutuz and Baybars did not lead from behind. They fought beside their men. In a culture where honor and bravery were sacred, this mattered deeply. The Mamluks did not merely obey orders, they followed leaders who bled beside them. That unity of purpose, that shared courage between ruler and soldier, became the invisible force that won Ain Jalut. And it ensured that long after the dust settled, the story of that day would echo through history. The day the Mongols met their match. Another remarkable aspect of this battle lies in how it proves that even the most flawless military systems have their weaknesses. The Mongol art of warfare, though revolutionary and fearsome, was not without its flaws. Their unmatched mobility became a liability in restricted or uneven terrain, where their famed speed and maneuverability lost their edge. Their aversion to drawn-out, grinding battles meant that when forced into one, they were often ill-prepared to endure it. Their terrifying reputation, which once caused entire cities to surrender without a fight, could also be turned against them through deception and psychological manipulation. The Mamluks understood these vulnerabilities and exploited them with extraordinary skill and precision. Chance and circumstance also played decisive roles at Ain Jalut. Had Hulagu Khan not withdrawn the bulk of his army to address the Mongol succession crisis, the Mamluks would have faced an overwhelming force, and history might have unfolded very differently. Had Kitbuka, the Mongol general, exercised more restraint and refused to be lured into the valley, the battle might never have been fought under such disadvantageous terms. Even the smallest tactical decisions made during those tense hours could have changed the outcome entirely. History often pivots on such fragile moments, and Ain Jalut was one of those rare turning points that reshaped civilizations. This battle also reminds us that no empire, no matter how mighty, can remain invincible forever. The Mongols had built the largest contiguous empire in human history, stretching from the shores of the Pacific Ocean to the plains of Eastern Europe. They had obliterated ancient kingdoms and redrawn the boundaries of continents. But even their dominance had limits. Geography, logistics, internal divisions, and the relentless resistance of capable foes eventually halted their seemingly unstoppable march. Ain Jalut became the line where the western expansion of the Mongol Empire came to an abrupt and permanent end. For Egypt, the victory at Ain Jalut meant survival. It ensured that Cairo would not meet the same fate as Baghdad, a city that had been reduced to ashes and whose people had been massacred. Cairo remained untouched, its mosques and libraries preserved, its people spared. Under Mamluk rule, the city flourished, becoming the largest metropolis in the Islamic world and a beacon of culture, trade, and scholarship. The breathtaking mosques and madrasas that still adorn Cairo today stand as enduring symbols of that triumph, monuments to the wealth, confidence, and stability that Ain Jalut helped secure. The memory of Ain Jalut continues to resonate deeply in the Arab and Islamic consciousness. It symbolizes defiance against overwhelming odds, unity in the face of annihilation, and the power of faith, courage, and strategy to overcome what seems impossible. Even in modern times, Middle Eastern leaders have invoked the spirit of Ain Jalut as a rallying cry in moments of crisis. Though such comparisons are not always historically precise, they underscore the enduring emotional and cultural power of this story. The parallels between the Mamluks and the Mongols are also striking. Both were born from the vast steppes of Eurasia. The Mongols were nomads from the eastern steppes, while many Mamluks hailed from Turkic tribes of the western steppes and the Caucasus. Both cultures revered martial skill above all else. Both trained from childhood to master horsemanship and combat. In essence, Ain Jalut was a confrontation between two warrior civilizations, each molded by similar environments but shaped by vastly different destinies. The Mongols retained their tribal, nomadic structure, built for conquest and expansion. The Mamluks, on the other hand, were forged into an Islamic military elite that had absorbed the discipline of an urban empire while preserving the ferocity of their nomadic origins. The battle also showcased the importance of military professionalism. Unlike the feudal levies and irregular militias common in other regions, both the Mongols and the Mamluks were composed of rigorously trained professional soldiers. They drilled relentlessly, maintained strict hierarchy and discipline, and followed advanced command systems that made them among the most efficient armies of their age. Thus, when these two titanic forces collided at Ain Jalut, the result hinged not on numbers, but on leadership, strategy, and circumstance. Yet behind the glory of this moment lay a sea of human suffering. Thousands of men perished in that narrow valley within a single day. Each had a story, a home, a family, a dream. The Mongol warriors who fell had journeyed thousands of miles from the cold grasslands of Mongolia, crossing deserts, mountains, and empires, only to die far from home on the soil of Palestine. The Mamluks who perished had once been children taken from distant lands, sold into servitude, trained in hardship, and ultimately sacrificed their lives for the homeland they had come to defend. Behind every grand tale of conquest and destiny lie countless untold human tragedies. The battle's legacy also influenced the evolution of warfare. The Mamluks proved that disciplined, well-trained cavalry archers could defeat even the feared Mongol armies. This reinforced the value of elite cavalry throughout the Middle East. However, within a few centuries, the world of war would be transformed by gunpowder. Firearms rendered the age of mounted archers obsolete. Ironically, the Ottomans, who conquered the Mamluk Sultanate in 1517, did so largely because they embraced this new technology, while the descendants of the Ain Jalut victors clung to their traditional methods. In that sense, the ultimate lesson of Ain Jalut, the need to adapt and learn from one's enemies, was forgotten. Today, the landscape of Ain Jalut bears little resemblance to the blood-soaked battlefield of 1260. The valley still lies in northern Israel, near the modern city of Afula. It is now peaceful farmland, dotted with orchards and fields where Mongol and Mamluk riders once fought to the death. There are no monuments, no museums, no grand memorials like those at Waterloo or Gettysburg. To most who pass by, it is just another quiet patch of land. But beneath that soil rest the bones of thousands of warriors, silent witnesses to a day when the destiny of nations was decided. Most of what we know about Ain Jalut comes from Arabic and Persian chroniclers. The Mongols of that time left no detailed written accounts of their own perspective, meaning history remembers the event largely through the words of the victors. Writers like Baybars al-Mansuri and Ibn Tagribildi preserved these memories, though they recorded them years or decades later. Through their works, the story of Ain Jalut survives not just as history, but as legend, a reminder of how courage, strategy, and fate can converge to alter the course of human civilization. Like all medieval historical records, these accounts must be read with caution, recognizing their inherent biases, exaggerations, and the tendency to shape stories for political or religious agendas. Yet despite these limitations, the essential truth of Ain Jalut, a masterfully executed Mamluk ambush that annihilated a Mongol force, is firmly established. It stands as a timeless reminder that history is never inevitable. In the mid-13th century, had you asked any learned observer to predict the outcome of a Mongol-Mamluk encounter, nearly everyone would have bet on the Mongols. They had conquered everything before them. They were the unstoppable storm. But the Mamluks defied what seemed certain. They studied their enemy, planned carefully, took daring risks, and fought with unshakable resolve. And against every expectation, they triumphed. This victory remains one of history's greatest lessons in human willpower. Determination, intelligence, and courage can overturn even the most impossible odds. Ain Jalut also reveals the crucial role of leadership in moments of extreme crisis. Sultan Qutuz made choices that were extraordinarily dangerous. He executed Mongol envoys knowing it might provoke total war. He marched his army out of Egypt to confront the enemy head-on, refusing the safer option of waiting behind fortifications. He restored Baybars to command despite their personal rivalry. Each of these decisions could have ended in catastrophe, but Qutuz understood that extraordinary threats demand extraordinary action. He risked everything, because he knew that caution against the Mongols was merely a slower road to destruction. True leaders in moments of crisis see clearly, act decisively, and inspire others to follow, even when the future seems impossible to face. The battle also underscores the immense value of intelligence and understanding in warfare. The Mamluks won not only because they were brave, but because they were informed. They studied the Mongols, how they moved, how they thought, how they fought. They learned the patterns, predicted the tactics, and crafted a plan that used Mongol strengths against them. In contrast, the Mongols underestimated their opponents, dismissing the Mamluks as just another army to crush. That imbalance of knowledge, this information asymmetry, proved fatal. In war, as in every human struggle, knowledge truly is power. Ain Jalut was also a defining moment in the evolution of Mamluk identity. Before the battle, they were a military caste that had seized Egypt's throne, ruling through strength rather than legitimacy. After Ain Jalut, they became the defenders of Islam, the warriors who had done what no one else could, defeat the Mongols in open battle. This triumph bestowed upon them a divine prestige and political legitimacy that would sustain their rule for centuries. Few events in history transform a regime's image so completely as a resounding victory in war. It is fascinating to imagine how differently the encounter might have unfolded under altered conditions. Had the Mongols brought their full arsenal of siege engines and artillery, the dynamics might have shifted dramatically. Had the terrain been broader and more open, the Mongol cavalry could have regained their advantage in speed and maneuver. Had Hulagu not withdrawn with the majority of his forces to attend the succession crisis in Mongolia, would the Mamluks have dared to stand and fight? These what-ifs are speculative, yet they illuminate just how fragile the threads of history truly are, how the fate of civilizations can hinge on circumstance and chance. The Battle of Ain Jalut remains profoundly relevant today, not merely as an ancient story, but as a study in leadership, intelligence, and strategic adaptability. When a seemingly invincible superpower is defeated by a smaller force through superior planning, knowledge, and psychological insight, it offers lessons that transcend time and culture. Modern military thinkers and historians still analyze Ain Jalut for its insights into asymmetric warfare and the timeless dynamics of human conflict. In the end, the weapon that destroyed the Mongol army was not a secret device or technological marvel. It was something far deeper and infinitely more powerful. It was knowledge, courage, and unwavering faith. It was a brilliant strategy shaped by experience and executed with precision. It was the use of terrain as a silent ally, and leadership that inspired men to fight beyond fear. Above all, it was the unbreakable determination of the Mamluks who refused to believe that the Mongols were unstoppable. They studied their enemy, exposed the flaws, devised a plan to exploit them, and carried it out with extraordinary discipline and bravery. The battle altered the course of world history. It saved Egypt, safeguarded the holy sites of Islam, defined the western boundary of the Mongol Empire, and shattered the myth of Mongol invincibility. It proved that even the mightiest conquerors have limits, and that the human spirit, when guided by clarity and conviction, can bend the arc of fate. The reverberations of Ain Jalut echoed across centuries, shaping the politics, faith, and culture of the Middle East in ways that endure to this day. When we think of Ain Jalut, we should not see it merely as a military confrontation, but as a defining moment when human courage and intelligence changed the seemingly inevitable flow of history. It was the day the impossible happened, the day the invincible Mongols met defeat, and the world was never the same again. For the Mamluk soldiers who fought in that valley, and for the countless believers who heard of the victory in the weeks that followed, Ain Jalut was far more than a triumph of arms. It was a sign of divine favor, proof that God had not abandoned his faithful in their darkest hour. When Qutuz shouted, "Wa Islama," amid the clash of swords, it was not merely a battle cry, it was a plea to heaven, a declaration of faith. To those who believed the victory at Ain Jalut was not only a result of skill or planning, but of divine will granting strength to the steadfast, that spiritual dimension has remained woven into the memory of Ain Jalut, transforming it from a military encounter into a sacred symbol of hope, faith, and resilience. And perhaps that is its greatest legacy. That even when the odds are impossible and defeat seems certain, there lies within the human spirit a power, born of conviction, courage, and trust in something greater that can defy the inevitable and reshape the destiny of the world.